The door slammed so hard the walls shook. That sound, it still echoes in my nightmares. Not because it was loud, but because of what came after it. Silence. The kind that crushes your chest and makes you forget how to breathe. I was lying there 23 hours post-labor, stitches still burning, my body feeling like it had been turned inside out. And he was gone. Just like that. No explanation. No goodbye to our son. Just the echo of that door and his footsteps fading down the hospital corridor. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them. 1, 2, 3. Anything to keep my mind from breaking. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, cold and indifferent. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. 27 missed calls from my mother. 16 texts asking if everything was okay. But nothing from him. Not a single word. The nurses avoided eye contact when they came in. They'd seen this before. Women left behind. Women whose partners couldn't handle the reality of fatherhood. Women who became invisible the moment they became mothers. My son, I'll call him James, was sleeping in the bassinet next to me. 3 hours old. Perfect. Tiny fingers curled into fists. His chest rising and falling with breaths so delicate I kept checking to make sure he was still breathing. He had no idea his father had just walked out of his life before he even opened his eyes. He had no idea that the man who promised me forever couldn't last 24 hours. And looking at him, at that innocent face, I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart, that was already shattered. Something deeper. Something I didn't even know existed until that moment. It was rage. Pure, white-hot rage that burned through the exhaustion and pain. How dare he? How dare he leave me here, bleeding and broken, with this tiny human who needed everything? How dare he make me a promise with his hand on my belly, whispering names and dreams, only to walk away when it got real? I wanted to scream. I wanted to chase him down that hallway and make him look at what he was abandoning. But I couldn't move. My body wouldn't let me. So I just lay there, tears running sideways into my hair, biting my lip so hard I tasted blood, trying not to wake the baby with my sobbing. The night nurse came in around 2 a.m. I must have looked like hell because she didn't ask questions. She just helped me to the bathroom, steadied me when my legs nearly gave out, and changed James's diaper while I tried to wash the salt off my face. Her name was Patricia. I'll never forget her. She was the first person to tell me the truth that night. Not the sugar-coated version. Not the everything happens for a reason garbage. Just the raw, honest truth. You're going to think this is the end, she said, adjusting James's blanket. You're going to think you can't do this alone. You're going to have moments, lots of them, where you want to give up. Where you'll wonder if your baby would be better off without you. Where you'll blame yourself for choosing wrong, for not seeing the signs, for being stupid enough to believe in forever. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and her eyes were kind but hard. But here's what I know after 30 years of doing this job. The ones who stay. The ones who push through that hell. They become something he could never be. They become unbreakable. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But at that moment, lying in that hospital bed with my body wrecked and my future crumbling, I felt anything but unbreakable. I felt like paper in the rain. Dissolving. Disappearing. Becoming nothing. 3 days later I was discharged. No partner to drive me home. No one to carry the car seat. No one to help me up the stairs to my apartment. His apartment technically, but he wasn't there. His mother called once, to tell me he needed space, and that I should respect his decision. Respect his decision. The decision to abandon his newborn son. The decision to leave me alone with no income, no support, no plan. I hung up on her. The first of many bridges I would burn in the months to come. Those first weeks are a blur of pain and survival. James cried every 90 minutes. I cried every time he did because I didn't know what he needed. Was he hungry, cold, sick, dying? Every sound he made sent me into panic mode. I had no idea what I was doing. My mother lived 6 hours away and couldn't leave my sick grandmother. My friends had their own lives, their own problems. I was alone in a way I'd never been alone before. It wasn't just physical solitude. It was the crushing weight of being the only thing standing between this tiny person and the world. If I failed, he failed. If I broke, he broke. There was no backup plan. No safety net. Just me. I remember the first time I ran out of diapers. It was 3 a.m, and James had blown through the last one. I didn't have money for more until my paycheck cleared. My maternity leave was unpaid, of course. I stood there in the kitchen, holding my screaming baby, wrapped in a towel because that's all I had, and I thought, this is it. This is rock bottom. This is what abandonment looks like. Not some dramatic movie scene. Just a mother in her underwear at 3 a.m., with $4.73 in her bank account, and no idea how she's going to make it to morning. But here's what his father didn't know. Here's what no one knew, not even me at the time. That moment, that desperate, humiliating, soul-crushing moment, was the moment I made myself a promise. A promise I would keep even when everything else fell apart. Even when the world told me I wasn't enough. Even when I doubted myself so deeply I couldn't recognize my own reflection. I promised myself James would never know the man who left us. Not the good version I'd created in my head. Not the fairy tale. He would know the truth, yes, but he would also know something more important. He would know that he was chosen. That he was fought for. That his mother didn't leave when it got hard. That his mother built a life out of nothing because he was worth it. And 23 years later, when that man, his father, showed up at our door, broken and desperate, begging for a second chance, it was James who made the final decision. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real story, the one that matters, starts here in this hospital room, with that slammed door and a promise I had no idea how to keep. Let me take you back. Back before the slammed door. Before the hospital. Before I knew what real loneliness felt like. Back to when I still believed in him. It was a Tuesday when we met. I remember because Tuesdays were my least favorite day. Not Monday like everyone else. Mondays had promise. Tuesdays were just there. I was working double shifts at a diner downtown. The kind of place where the coffee was always burnt and the regulars knew your name before you knew theirs. He came in around 2 p.m., right in that dead zone between lunch and dinner when I'd usually lean against the counter and zone out. He ordered black coffee and apple pie. I remember thinking his hands looked strong, clean, like someone who worked with them but took care of them. Not like the construction guys who came in with grease under their nails, or the office workers with their soft, unused fingers. You look tired, he said. Not in a creepy way. In a way that felt true. Like he actually saw me, not just the uniform and the forced smile. I am tired, I said back. And that was it. That was how it started. With honesty. With him seeing something in me that I'd forgotten was there. We talked for 2 hours that day. He told me he was a mechanic, that he'd moved here 6 months ago from Ohio, that his favorite movie was The Shawshank Redemption because hope is a dangerous thing but also the only thing that matters. I told him about my dream of going back to school, about how I dropped out of community college when my dad got sick, about how I felt stuck in this town like my feet were buried in concrete. He listened. Really listened. The kind of listening where someone's eyes don't drift to their phone or the TV in the corner. The kind where you feel like maybe, just maybe, you matter. 3 weeks later, he kissed me outside that same diner. The neon sign was flickering. Half the letters burnt out so it read Marwai's Dinar instead of Mary's Diner. I'd always hated that sign. But in that moment, with his hands on my face and his lips warm against mine, I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Isn't that what love does? It makes you see magic in burnt-out neon and broken things. 6 months after that I was pregnant. Unplanned. Terrifying. I found out on a Saturday morning, alone in my bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines that might as well have been a prison sentence. I was 22 years old. I had $1,200 in savings and a car that needed a new transmission. Couldn't afford a baby. I could barely afford myself. I sat on that bathroom floor for an hour, the test clutched in my shaking hand, trying to figure out how to tell him. Trying to figure out if this was the end of us before we'd even really begun. But when I told him, voice cracking, tears already falling, He did something I didn't expect. He smiled. Not a small smile. Not a polite smile. A genuine, wide, holy shit, this is amazing smile. He pulled me into his chest so hard I could hear his heartbeat, fast and wild, and he whispered, "We're gonna be parents. We're gonna have a family. I promise I'll take care of you both. I promise." I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. The first few months were hard but beautiful. Morning sickness that lasted all day. Exhaustion that made my bones feel like lead. But he was there. He'd hold my hair back when I threw up. He'd rub my feet after my shifts, even though they smelled like fryer grease and old shoes. He'd talk to my belly at night, telling our baby about the life we were going to build. "You're going to have everything I didn't," he'd say. "A dad who shows up. A mom who loves you more than air. A real home." I'd fall asleep to those promises, his hand warm on my stomach, thinking maybe I was lucky after all. Maybe this was how fairy tales started. Not with castles and princes, but with calloused hands and whispered dreams in the dark. But somewhere around month 5, things started shifting. Small things at first. He'd come home later. He'd check his phone more. The way he looked at me changed. Not with disgust exactly, but with something worse. Distance. Like I was becoming someone he didn't recognize. My body was changing. My belly growing. My ankles swelling. I wasn't the girl in the diner uniform anymore. I was something else. Something that demanded more than he'd bargained for. "You're always tired," he said one night, frustrated because I'd fallen asleep during a movie we were supposed to watch together. "We never do anything anymore." "I'm growing a human," I shot back. "I'm allowed to be tired." He didn't respond, just turned away. And that silence, it was the first crack in the foundation. The first sign that maybe his promises were just words. Just things he said because they sounded good in the moment. By month 7, he was barely home. Always working late, he said. Always needing to help a friend, to run an errand, to be anywhere but in our apartment with me and my swollen body and my constant needs. I started eating dinner alone. Started going to doctor's appointments alone. Started preparing the nursery alone. Folding tiny onesies with tears running down my face because I could feel him slipping away and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I confronted him 2 weeks before my due date. Cornered him in the kitchen after he'd come home at midnight smelling like beer and someone else's perfume. "Are you cheating on me?" I asked, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "Is there someone else?" He looked at me like I was crazy, like I was the problem. "You're paranoid," he said. "Pregnancy hormones are making you insane. I'm out there working my ass off to provide for this family. And you're accusing me of cheating. Unbelievable." He slammed the bedroom door. Left me standing there in the kitchen, 8.5 months pregnant, wondering if I really was crazy. Wondering if this was my fault somehow. Wondering when I became someone he couldn't stand to be around. The night I went into labor, he was at a bar. I called him 7 times. 7. He didn't answer. I had to call an Uber to take me to the hospital, doubled over in pain in the back seat while the driver, a kind woman named Rosa who I'll never forget, held my hand and told me to breathe. She stayed with me until he finally showed up, 3 hours later, reeking of whiskey and making excuses. "My phone died," he said. I didn't know. But his eyes were empty. Like he was already gone. Like the man who'd promised to take care of us had died somewhere between the pregnancy test and the delivery room. He stayed through the labor. Barely. He held my hand when the nurses told him to, but I could feel the resentment in his grip. I could see the regret on his face every time I screamed. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. This wasn't the fantasy he'd sold himself. This was blood and pain and reality, and he couldn't handle it. So when James finally came, after 23 hours of hell, and they put him on my chest, I looked at his father, at the man I'd built a future around, and I saw nothing. No love, no pride, no connection. Just a stranger who wanted to be anywhere else. "I need some air," he said, 10 minutes after our son was born. He kissed my forehead. Felt like goodbye. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time he'd touch me. The last time I'd see his face up close. Because 4 hours later, that door slammed and he was gone. But here's what I've learned about flashbacks. About memories. They're not always reliable. When you're in the middle of a trauma, your brain protects you by rewriting the past. Making it softer. Making the good parts glow brighter so the bad parts don't destroy you completely. I spent months, years, romanticizing those early days. The coffee, the promises, the hand on my belly. I held on to those memories like they were proof that I hadn't been completely stupid. That there had been something real between us. But the truth was messier. The signs were there all along. I just didn't want to see them. His fear of commitment. His selfishness disguised as spontaneity. The way he'd disappear when things got difficult. I ignored it all because I was lonely, and he made me feel less lonely. And then I got pregnant, and lonely turned into trapped, and trapped turned into abandoned. If I could go back to that girl in the diner, the one who thought strong hands and good listening meant a good man, I'd tell her to run. I'd tell her that love shouldn't make you smaller. That promises are only as good as the person making them. That fairy tales are fantasies for a reason. But I can't go back. None of us can. We only go forward. Through the pain. Through the rubble of broken promises. Through the impossible task of raising a child alone while the world watches and judges and whispers that you should have known better. I should have known better. But I didn't. And now I had to figure out how to survive anyway. Before I tell you about the collapse, you need to understand what I had. Not much by most people's standards. But to me it was everything. It was enough. It was mine. I grew up in a small house on Maple Street. One of those streets where everyone knows everyone and your business is everybody's business. My parents weren't rich, but they were steady. Dad worked at the post office for 32 years. Same route every day. Same jokes with the same people. Mom was a teacher's aide at the elementary school. The kind of woman who kept candy in her pockets for sad kids and band-aids for scraped knees. They weren't perfect. Dad drank too much beer on Fridays. Mom worried too much about what the neighbors thought. But they loved each other in that quiet, unglamorous way that lasts. The kind of love that doesn't make for good movies but makes for good lives. Our house smelled like coffee in the mornings and whatever Mom was baking in the afternoons. She had this ritual. Every Sunday she'd make cinnamon rolls from scratch. Not the kind from a can. The real kind, with dough that had to rise twice and glaze that dripped down the sides. I'd wake up to that smell, and before I even opened my eyes, I'd know it was Sunday. I'd know I was safe. I'd know that whatever happened during the week, fights with friends, bad grades, teenage heartbreak, Sunday would reset everything. We'd sit at that scratched-up kitchen table, my parents and I, and we'd eat warm cinnamon rolls and talk about nothing important, and that was enough. Had friends back then. Real ones. Melissa, who I'd known since 3rd grade, who knew all my secrets and still liked me anyway. Jake, who made me laugh until I couldn't breathe and who once punched Tommy Richards for calling me ugly in 7th grade. Sarah, who taught me how to do my makeup and sneak out my bedroom window when my parents went to sleep. We had plans, the 4 of us. After high school, we'd all move to the city together. Get an apartment. Figure out life. Be young and stupid and free. Those were the kinds of promises kids make when they don't know how fast life can change. When they don't know that sometimes you blink and everyone scatters and you're left holding memories instead of friendships. High school wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I was decent at English, terrible at math, and somewhere in the middle at everything else. I wasn't popular, but I wasn't invisible either. I had a spot at the lunch table. I went to parties sometimes. I kissed boys in the back of movie theaters and wrote bad poetry in notebooks I'd burn years later out of embarrassment. Had dreams back then. Small ones, but they felt huge. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to travel. I wanted to write stories that mattered, that made people feel something real. I wanted to be someone who did something with her life instead of just existing in it. Then Dad got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. He was dead 6 months later. And those 6 months hollowed out our house like a fire. Mom aged 10 years in 10 weeks. I dropped out of community college where I just started my first semester because someone had to help with the medical bills, someone had to drive him to chemo, someone had to sit with him when he couldn't sleep because the pain was too bad. I got the job at the diner. I told myself it was temporary, just until we got back on our feet, just until things stabilized. But things never stabilized. Dad died on a Tuesday, my least favorite day, remember? And after the funeral, after the casseroles from neighbors stopped coming, after everyone went back to their normal lives, Mom and I were left with a grief so big it didn't fit inside the house anymore. We couldn't talk about it, couldn't look at each other without crying. So we just existed side by side in that small house on Maple Street, two ghosts pretending to be alive. I kept working at the diner, kept telling myself I'd go back to school next semester, then the semester after that, then next year. The dreams got smaller, more practical. Maybe I'd become a manager. Maybe I'd save enough to get my own place. Maybe I'd meet someone nice, someone steady, someone who'd make me feel less alone. And then I did meet someone. And for a little while I had a life again. Not the life I'd planned, but a life. Routine. A reason to wake up. Our apartment wasn't much. A one-bedroom on the third floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. The heater barely worked. The neighbors fought every night. The hallway smelled like cigarettes and mildew. But when he moved in with me, when we painted the walls a pale yellow and hung curtains I'd found at Goodwill, when we cooked dinner together in that tiny kitchen with a stove that only had 2 working burners, it felt like home. Felt like maybe I was building something. Maybe I was going to be okay after all. I remember mornings before everything fell apart. I'd wake up before him, watch him sleep for a few minutes. His face soft and unguarded, his breathing steady. I'd make coffee in the old percolator he'd bought at a garage sale. I'd sit at our thrift store kitchen table and watch the sun come up through the window that overlooked the parking lot, and I'd feel something close to contentment. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. But the hope of happiness. The belief that we were heading toward something good. That this tiny apartment with its broken heater and fighting neighbors was just the beginning. That we'd have a baby and then a better place and then maybe, eventually, a life that looked like the ones I used to dream about. I had a routine. Work from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. most days. Come home, shower off the grease smell, make dinner. We'd watch TV together. His hand on my growing belly, talking about names and nursery colors and whether we'd be the kind of parents who used organic baby food or if that was pretentious nonsense. Saturday mornings we'd go to the farmer's market downtown. He'd buy me sunflowers, my favorite. Not roses. Never roses. Sunflowers because they were bright and cheap and lasted longer. He knew that. He remembered. I thought that meant something. I thought men who remembered your favorite flower were men who stayed. I had books I was reading. A mystery novel I'd picked up at the library about a detective who solved cold cases. I was only halfway through when I went into labor. It's still sitting on my nightstand, bookmark at page 184, waiting for me to finish it. I never did. After he left, I couldn't make myself care about fictional problems. Couldn't escape into someone else's story when my own was falling apart. I had hope. That's what I'm trying to tell you. That's what I had to lose. Not money or status or some glamorous life. Just the simple, ordinary hope that I was going to be okay. That we were going to be a family. That this baby growing inside me was the start of something beautiful instead of the thing that made him run. I had a future I believed in. I had a man I thought loved me. I had a version of myself that still smiled easily, still laughed at stupid jokes, still believed that good things happened to people who tried hard enough. And then, in the space of a single door slam, I lost all of it. The apartment became a prison. The routine became survival. The hope became a luxury I couldn't afford. I had to figure out how to live without any of the things that made life worth living. I had to become someone I didn't recognize because the girl I used to be, the one who believed in sunflowers and forever, couldn't survive what came next. That girl died in the hospital bed. And someone harder, someone colder, someone who had no choice but to be unbreakable, took her place. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. First came the collapse. First came the humiliation. First came the moment when I realized that the life I thought I had was never really mine at all. It was just borrowed. And he took it back the second it got too real. The first week home was hell. Not metaphorical hell. Real, physical, can't breathe, can't think, can't function hell. James cried. The walls closed in. The silence between his screams was worse than the screaming itself, because in the silence, I had to face what had happened. I had to face the fact that I was completely alone. That the man who'd promised forever had lasted exactly 4 hours into fatherhood. That I was 22 years old, bleeding into industrial-sized pads, my breasts leaking through every shirt I owned, with a human being who depended on me for literally everything, and I had no idea what I was doing. The apartment still smelled like him. His cologne on the bathroom counter. His work boots by the door. His coffee mug in the sink. I couldn't bring myself to touch any of it. Couldn't pack it up or throw it away because doing that would make it real. Would make it permanent. So I just existed around his ghost, stepping over his things, pretending he might walk back through that door any second and say it was all a mistake. A moment of panic. Cold feet. But he was sorry, so sorry, and he wanted to try again. He never came back. Day 3 I ran out of food. Not baby food, formula, thank God I had enough of that. But real food. Food for me. I opened the fridge. Half a carton of milk that had gone sour, some wilted lettuce, 3 eggs. The freezer had ice and nothing else. My stomach hurt. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten something that wasn't crackers or the dry cereal I'd been eating by the handful straight from the box. But I couldn't leave. Couldn't take James out into the world yet. Couldn't face the grocery store, the stairs, the questions about where the baby's father was. So I ate the eggs. All 3. Scrambled them with no salt, no butter, nothing, because we didn't have anything. And I sat on the kitchen floor while James screamed in his bassinet, and I chewed and swallowed and told myself this was temporary. This was rock bottom. Things would get better. It didn't. Day 5 the electricity bill came. Past due. I'd forgotten to pay it before the hospital. He was supposed to handle bills, that was our agreement. I worked, he handled the paperwork. But he'd stopped paying things weeks ago, I realized, tearing open envelope after envelope. Water. Internet. The car insurance that was already cancelled. He'd been preparing to leave. Planning it. While I was folding baby clothes and painting that stupid nursery. He was sabotaging our life, making sure when he left I'd drown. Called him. 17 times that day. Every call went straight to voicemail. That generic robot voice. The person you are trying to reach is not available. Over and over and over until I wanted to throw my phone through the window. Until I wanted to scream so loud the whole building would hear me. But I didn't. Because James was sleeping, finally. And waking him meant another 2 hours of crying neither of us could handle. I called his mother instead. Mistake. Huge mistake. He's going through something, she said, her voice cold and clipped. You have to understand this is hard for him too. Hard for him. My voice cracked. I just gave birth to his child. He left me in a hospital bed. He won't answer my calls. The bills aren't paid. I have nothing and he's going through something. You trapped him, she said. And there it was. The truth she'd been holding back. He wasn't ready for a baby. You knew that. And you kept it anyway. Hung up. Sat there on the couch, phone in my shaking hand, and felt something inside me shatter. Trapped him. Like I got pregnant on purpose. Like I wanted this. Like any of this was part of some master plan to ruin his life. The rage came back then, hot and vicious, but it had nowhere to go. No outlet. So it just sat in my chest, burning, making every breath hurt. Week 2 my mom called. I'd been avoiding her. Couldn't stand the pity in her voice, the I told you so she'd never say, but I'd hear anyway. But she called and called until I answered. And the second I heard her voice I broke. Mom, I can't do this. Yes, you can. I can't. I don't know how. He's crying all the time. I don't know what he needs. I don't know how to make it stop. And I'm so tired. I'm so tired I can't think straight. Can't see straight. Keep forgetting things. Important things. I forgot to eat yesterday. Just completely forgot until I almost passed out. What if I forget something with James? What if I hurt him by accident because I'm too exhausted to function? Silence. Then quietly, I can't come help, sweetheart. Grandma's worse. The doctors don't think she has much time. I can't leave her. I knew that. Of course I knew that. But hearing it out loud, hearing that there was no rescue coming, no one who could take over for even a few hours so I could sleep, so I could breathe, it broke something else inside me. Another piece cracking off, falling into the void. I understand, I said. And I did. But understanding didn't make it easier. Didn't make me less alone. Week 3, James got sick. Fever. Not high, but high enough to send me into full panic mode. I called the pediatrician's office at 2 a.m., sobbing into the phone, convinced my baby was dying and it was my fault somehow. The nurse, patient, kind, talked me down, told me what to watch for, told me it was probably nothing, told me I was doing fine. But I wasn't doing fine. I was falling apart in real time, and everyone could see it except me. I took him to the ER anyway. Waited 4 hours in those plastic chairs, James on my lap, trying not to look at the other families. The mothers with partners. The fathers holding diaper bags, buying coffee, making jokes to calm their wives down. The couples who were teams, who were in it together. I sat alone, hungry and exhausted and terrified, while strangers' eyes slid over me and away, judging, pitying, wondering what I'd done to deserve this. The doctor confirmed what the nurse had said. Mild fever. Nothing serious. Give him infant Tylenol and monitor him. He'd be fine. I nodded, thanked her, carried my baby back out to the parking lot where my car waited. The one with the check engine light on. The one with the bald tires I couldn't afford to replace. And I sat in the driver's seat and sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe. James started crying too, feeding off my distress, and we sat there in that dark parking lot, two broken people, and I realized with horrible clarity that this was my life now. This desperation, this fear, this constant, crushing weight of being the only thing standing between my child and disaster. The humiliation was the worst part. Worse than the exhaustion. Worse than the fear. The humiliation of being pitted. Of being the cautionary tale. Of being the girl who should have known better. I could feel it everywhere. The grocery store where I paid with food stamps while the woman behind me sighed impatiently. The bank where I begged for an extension on my overdrawn account. The waiting rooms where other mothers asked, "Where's Dad?" with fake brightness that couldn't hide their curiosity. "He left," I started saying. Flat. Emotionless. No explanation. Because the explanation required me to relive it. And reliving it meant feeling it all over again. And I couldn't afford to feel anything anymore. I had to survive. Feelings were a luxury for people with support systems and full refrigerators and partners who didn't abandon them. Month 2, my body still hadn't healed. I was still bleeding. Still in pain. The doctor said it was normal, but it didn't feel normal. Felt like my body was punishing me. Reminding me every second of every day what I'd been through. What I'd lost. I'd look at James, this perfect, innocent baby who'd done nothing wrong, and I'd feel love so fierce it scared me. But right next to that love was resentment I couldn't admit to anyone. Resentment that he existed. That his existence had cost me everything. That I couldn't just walk away like his father had because I was trapped by biology, by responsibility, by the fact that I couldn't live with myself if I abandoned him too. I was a bad mother. I knew it. Every time the resentment flashed through me, every time I felt relief when he finally fell asleep and I had a few minutes where no one needed me, every time I fantasized about just driving away and never coming back, I hated myself. Good mothers don't think like that. Good mothers are grateful, patient, self-sacrificing. But I was none of those things. I was angry and bitter and drowning. And I couldn't tell anyone because admitting it meant admitting I wasn't strong enough. That I was failing. That maybe his father had been right to leave. Month 3, I had to go back to work. Not because I was ready. Not because my body had healed or my mind had cleared or James was sleeping through the night. Because I had $47 in my bank account and rent was due in 6 days. The diner said they'd hold my position. They lied. I showed up Monday morning, James strapped to my chest in a second-hand carrier I'd bought at a yard sale, and the manager, Tony, who'd known me for 3 years, who'd eaten at my mom's table on Thanksgiving when he had nowhere else to go, looked at me like I was a stranger. "You can't bring a baby here," he said. Not unkindly, just matter of fact, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I know. I need to talk to you about my schedule. About coming back." My voice was shaking. I hated how desperate I sounded. "Oh, small," he sighed. Looked away. "We filled your spot. Can't keep a position open indefinitely. You understand. You said you'd hold it. You said. I said we'd try. We tried. But 3 months is a long time in this business. I got bills too, sweetheart. I'm sorry." Sorry. That word again. The word people use when they're not actually sorry, when they're just trying to end a conversation that makes them uncomfortable. I stood there in that diner where I'd worked double shifts for years, where I knew every regular's order by heart, where I'd covered for Tony a dozen times when he showed up hungover or not at all, and I understood something fundamental about the world. Loyalty only goes one direction. Never up. I applied to 23 jobs that week. Fast food, retail, cleaning services, administrative assistant positions I had no qualifications for but applied to anyway because desperation makes you delusional. Most didn't respond. The ones that did wanted to know about childcare arrangements, about my availability, about gaps in my employment history. "I had a baby," I'd say, trying to sound confident, trying to sound like that was a normal, acceptable reason to have 3 months of unemployment. "And you have childcare sorted?" "I'm working on it." Blick. Dial tone. Next application. Childcare. The word that would haunt me for the next year. Because here's what no one tells you when you're young and naive and thinking about having kids. Childcare costs more than rent. More than food. More than everything except maybe a mortgage you'll never qualify for. Daycare centers wanted $1,200 a month. Per month. For one infant. More than I'd ever made waitressing. More than I could possibly earn at any job I was qualified for. The math didn't work. Couldn't work. I'd be paying to work. Going into debt to have someone else raise my child while I served coffee and smiled through my exhaustion. In-home daycares were cheaper but terrifying. I visited six strangers' houses where they'd watch 3, 4, sometimes 7 kids at once in living rooms that smelled like old carpet and dirty diapers. One woman, chain smoking on her porch while toddlers played inside unsupervised, quoted me $600 a month and said James would be fine. "Babies are easy," she said, ash falling onto her stained sweatshirt. "They just sleep most of the time anyway." I didn't leave him there. Couldn't. But I was running out of options. I applied for assistance, state aid, childcare vouchers. Stood in line at the social services office for 3 hours with James crying the whole time, surrounded by other desperate people with their own impossible situations, waiting for my number to be called so I could beg a stranger behind bulletproof glass to help me survive. The caseworker was a thin woman with tired eyes and a voice that suggested she'd had this conversation 1,000 times. She looked at my paperwork. Looked at me. "You're employed." "Not currently." "I'm looking. You need to be employed or in a job training program to qualify for childcare assistance." "But I can't get employed without childcare." "I understand. But those are the rules." I wanted to scream. Wanted to flip the desk and demand to speak to whoever made these insane rules. These impossible catch-22s designed to keep people exactly where they were. But I didn't. Because I was holding my baby, and making a scene would get me escorted out, and I needed help too badly to burn this bridge. "What about cash assistance?" "NF." She typed something into her computer. "You'd qualify for $342 a month." $342. Rent was $850. I laughed. Actually laughed. A bitter, broken sound that made her flinch. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Her voice was softer now. Sympathetic. But sympathy doesn't pay bills. "No. Thank you for your time." I walked out of that office with James and a stack of pamphlets about programs I didn't qualify for, resources that required things I didn't have, phone numbers for organizations that would refer me to other organizations that would put me on waiting lists that were years long. I sat in my car in the parking lot and called my mom. They won't help me. I don't qualify for anything because I don't have a job, but I can't get a job without childcare. And I can't get childcare without a job. It's a circle. It's designed to trap people. What about asking his family? His parents? His mother thinks I trapped him, Mom. She's not going to help raise his son. Silence. Then, what about friends? Could someone watch James while you work? Friends. I almost laughed again. What friends? Melissa had moved to Oregon for college. Jake was deployed overseas. Sarah stopped returning my texts after the third time I canceled plans because I was too exhausted to leave the house. I had no friends anymore. I had a baby and a mountain of problems, and no one left who wanted to be around either. Week 4 of job searching, I got desperate. Started looking at overnight shifts, warehouse work, stocking shelves at big box stores from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Jobs where I could work while James slept, where I wouldn't need childcare, where I could possibly survive. I got hired at a Target distribution center. Night shift. Minimum wage. Lifting boxes that weighed more than my baby. Scanning items until my hands cramped and my vision blurred. Walking concrete floors for 8 hours straight on feet that still ached from pregnancy. I lasted 2 weeks. Not because I wasn't tough enough. Not because the work was too hard. But because you can't function on 2 hours of sleep. James still woke up every 3 hours. I'd get home at 6:30 a.m., feed him, try to sleep for an hour, get woken up by his crying, stay up all day taking care of him, put him down at 8 p.m., maybe sleep for 90 minutes, wake up and go back to work. 2 weeks of that and I was hallucinating. Seeing things that weren't there. Forgetting where I was. I nearly crashed my car twice. Fell asleep standing up during a shift and dropped a box on my foot. Breaking 2 toes I couldn't afford to have x-rayed. Quit. I had to. Because dead mothers can't raise children. Back to square one. Back to the classifieds and the applications and the rejection emails that all said the same thing in different words. You're not enough. You don't have enough experience, enough education, enough stability. Enough proof that you're worth taking a chance on. I started selling things. My laptop. The one I'd saved for 2 years to buy back when I still thought I'd finish college. $200. My dad's watch, the one he wore every day. The one I'd kept because it still smelled like him. $80. Clothes I hadn't worn since before pregnancy and would probably never fit into again. $30. Books, kitchen appliances I didn't need. Furniture that was old and worn but still worth something to someone. Every week I'd list something new online. Watch strangers come to my door, take pieces of my life, and hand me cash that would be gone within days. James needed formula. Diapers. I needed to eat something other than ramen and dollar store bread. Car needed gas. The electricity bill needed paying. Rent was always due. Always waiting. A deadline that didn't care about my circumstances or my efforts or how hard I was trying. Month 5 I was evicted. Technically asked to leave. The landlord, a man who owned half the buildings in my neighborhood and drove a car worth more than everything I'd ever owned combined, gave me a formal notice taped to my door. Failure to pay rent. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days. To find a new place with no money, no job, no references willing to vouch for me, and a baby who'd start screaming the second any potential landlord asked to see the apartment. Tried. God, I tried. Called every number in the classifieds. Begged property managers to work with me to give me a chance to understand my situation. They all said the same thing. No income, no rental history, no cosigner, no apartment. Math doesn't care about circumstances. On day 29, I moved into a motel. One of those weekly rate places on the edge of town where the parking lot is full of cars with expired tags and the walls are thin enough to hear every argument, every transaction, every sound of other people's desperation. $250 a week. A room with a bed, a bathroom, a microwave, and a mini fridge. No kitchen. No privacy. No space for a nursery or a high chair or any of the things I'd carefully collected when I still thought I was building a home. I cried the first night in that motel room. Cried while James slept in his portable crib next to me, oblivious to how far we'd fallen. Cried because this was rock bottom. This was failure. This was the nightmare I'd been fighting so hard to avoid, and I'd landed in it anyway despite doing everything right. Despite loving my son. Despite working and applying and begging and selling everything I had. It wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. And the worst part. The part that kept me up that night staring at the water-stained ceiling while someone screamed in the room next door? The tiny, poisonous voice in my head that whispered, maybe James would be better off without me. Maybe adoption. Maybe foster care. Maybe anything except this. Except a mother who couldn't provide. Who couldn't protect him from living in a motel where the door didn't lock properly and the people next door were doing drugs and the future was a dark tunnel with no light. I hated myself for thinking it. But I thought it anyway. And that's how I knew I was broken. I need to tell you about the night I almost quit. Not quit the job hunt or the struggle. Quit everything. Quit being a mother. Quit being alive. It was a Thursday. Week 6 in that motel. James was 7 months old. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours total in 2 days. I'd been rejected from another job that morning. A cleaning position at an office building, night shift, $11 an hour. We need someone who can start immediately, they said. Your childcare situation is too uncertain. My childcare situation. Like it was a minor inconvenience instead of the thing that was slowly killing me. James wouldn't stop crying. Teething maybe. Or hungry. Or uncomfortable in the heat because the air conditioning in our room was broken and the manager said he'd fix it when he got around to it. Tried everything. Fed him. Changed him. Rocked him. Sang to him. Walked circles around that tiny room until my legs shook. Nothing worked. He just screamed and screamed and screamed, and I could feel something inside me cracking. Not breaking, it had already broken weeks ago. This was different. This was the last thread holding me together starting to fray. I put him in his crib. Walked into the bathroom. Closed the door. Sat on the floor with my back against the tub and my hands over my ears, trying to muffle the sound of his crying. But I could still hear it. Could still feel it vibrating through the walls, through my bones, through every atom of my exhausted body. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. Can't. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But I'm done. I'm finished. Have nothing left. The thoughts came fast after that. Dark thoughts. The kind that terrify you even as you're thinking them because part of you knows they're not really you. They're the depression talking, the trauma talking, the complete and total breakdown of your mind under impossible pressure. But they felt real. They felt like the only logical conclusion to an unsolvable problem. What if I just left? What if I walked out of this motel room, got in my car, and drove until I ran out of gas? Someone would find James eventually. The motel manager. Another guest. He'd be scared and hungry but alive. They'd call social services. He'd go into the system. And maybe, probably, he'd be better off. He'd have foster parents with stable incomes. Real house. Food in the fridge. People who weren't broken and used up and drowning in debt and despair. People who could actually take care of him instead of just barely keeping him alive. Or what if I didn't leave at all? What if I just ended it? Pills. The razor I used to shave my legs. The belt hanging in the closet. Quick methods. Permanent solutions. James would still end up in foster care, but at least I wouldn't have to carry this weight anymore. Wouldn't have to wake up every morning to the same impossible situation. Wouldn't have to fail him day after day after day while the world watched and judged and did nothing to help. I sat on that bathroom floor for 20 minutes entertaining these thoughts. Really considering them. Not as dramatic fantasies but as actual options. Escape routes. Ways out of a life that had become unbearable. And then something happened. James stopped crying. Just stop. Mid-scream silence. I held my breath, waiting for it to start again, but it didn't. The quiet was so sudden, so complete, it scared me more than the crying had. I stood up fast. Too fast, the room spun, and opened the bathroom door. He was standing in his crib. He'd pulled himself up for the first time. Standing there holding onto the rail with both hands, swaying slightly, looking at me with those huge eyes that were the same color as mine. And he smiled. Not a reflex, not gas, a real smile. Recognition. Boy. Like even though I was the worst mother in the world, even though I'd just been in the bathroom fantasizing about abandoning him, even though I'd failed him in every possible way, he was happy to see me. He loved me anyway. I walked over to his crib, picked him up. He wrapped his tiny arms around my neck and laid his head on my shoulder, and I felt something break open inside me. Not in a bad way, in a necessary way. Like lancing a wound that had been festering too long. Cried. Really cried. Not the silent tears I'd been crying for months. Big, ugly, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. James didn't seem to mind. He just held on, his little hand patting my back like he was comforting me instead of the other way around. "I'm sorry," I whispered into his hair. "I'm so sorry. I'm trying. I know I'm not enough. I know you deserve better. But I'm trying." And here's the thing about rock bottom. The thing they don't tell you in inspirational memes or self-help books or therapy sessions you can't afford. Rock bottom isn't one moment. It's not one decision. It's a process. A gradual wearing down of everything you thought you were until you're left with only two choices. Give up completely, or decide that even though you're broken and exhausted and terrified, you're going to keep going anyway. Not because you believe things will get better. Not because you have hope. But because the alternative is unthinkable. I chose to keep going. But not in some triumphant movie montage way. I chose it quietly. Sitting on the floor of a motel room that cost $250 a week, holding my 7-month-old son, with $23 in my bank account and no plan and no hope and no reason to believe tomorrow would be any different than today. I chose it because when I looked at James, at his perfect face and his trust that I would somehow figure this out, giving up stopped being an option. That night after I put him back to sleep, I sat at the tiny table in our room with a pen and the back of an old envelope. The eviction notice from our apartment actually, because irony is cruel like that, and I wrote down everything I had left. Not material things. Those were gone. But other things. Things that couldn't be taken away. I had James. I had my body, which was still working even though I'd abused it with exhaustion and neglect. I had my mind, which was cracked but not shattered. I had my mom, who couldn't help physically but called every week to remind me I wasn't completely alone. I had the memory of who I used to be before all this, which meant that person still existed somewhere inside me, even if I couldn't reach her right now. And I had stubbornness, bite even. The bitter, burning refusal to let his father be right. To let everyone who'd written me off as another statistic, another poor girl who couldn't hack it, be proven correct. It wasn't much. But it was something. And something I decided was enough to build on. I made myself 3 promises that night. Not grand ones. Not I'll get rich, or I'll go back to school, or any of the aspirational nonsense that felt impossible and therefore paralyzing. Small promises. Achievable ones. 1. I would not hurt myself, no matter how much I wanted to. Because James needed a mother, even a broken one, more than he needed a dead one or an absent one. 2. I would ask for help. Real help. I'd swallowed my pride for months trying to handle this alone because asking for help felt like admitting failure. But I was already failing. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. 3. I would forgive myself for not being enough. Not today. Probably not tomorrow. But eventually. Because hating myself took energy I needed for survival. The next morning, I called a woman from a church I'd never attended. Someone's mother had given me her number months ago. Said she ran a program for single moms. I'd thrown the number away because I wasn't religious and I didn't want charity and I didn't want to be saved by strangers who'd pray over me and judge me and make me feel even more ashamed than I already did. But desperation makes you flexible. Her name was Ruth. She answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Ruth. Hi. As someone gave me your number. I'm a single mom and I'm living in a motel with my baby and I don't have a job and I'm out of options and I don't know what to do." It all came out in a rush. No dignity. No filter. Just truth. Silence for a second. Then, "What's your address?" She showed up 2 hours later with bags of groceries, diapers, and a woman named Carmen who ran a home daycare and had an opening. Not the sketchy kind of home daycare. Real one. Licensed and clean and run by a grandmother who'd raised 4 kids of her own and now watched 3 others while their mothers worked. She quoted me a price I still couldn't afford, then cut it in half when Ruth explained my situation. "You pay what you can," Carmen said, looking at James like he was already one of her own. "We figure out the rest later." I cried again. Seemed like all I did anymore. But these were different tears. Relief tears. The kind that come when you've been drowning and someone finally throws you a rope. Ruth helped me apply for programs I'd never heard of. Emergency assistance funds. Rent subsidies. Job training programs specifically for single mothers. She called people. Made appointments. Drove me places. She didn't preach. Didn't try to convert me. Just helped. Actually, tangibly helped. Within 2 weeks, I had an interview at a call center. Entry level. $13 an hour. Benefits after 90 days. They worked with Carmen's daycare schedule. It wasn't a career. It wasn't my dreams coming true. It was survival. But survival, I was learning, was enough. But something inside me still pulsed. Even in the darkest moment, even when I'd been ready to give up everything, something had refused to die. Call it maternal instinct. Call it stubbornness. Call it whatever you want. Called it a promise. The promise I'd made in that hospital bed while he slept in my arms and his father's footsteps faded down the hallway. James would know he was chosen. He would know he was worth fighting for. And someday, when he was old enough to understand, he'd know his mother didn't leave when it got hard. That promise kept me alive when nothing else could. A call center job saved my life. Not in any dramatic way. Not in the way movies portray salvation. No swelling music, no montage of success, no sudden transformation from struggling to thriving. It saved me in the quiet, unglamorous way that stability saves people. Gave me a routine. Paycheck every 2 weeks. Health insurance. A reason to shower and put on clean clothes and pretend I was a person who had her life together. I started in October. James was 9 months old. Carmen's daycare became his second home, and she became the grandmother he'd never have from his father's side. She taught him to walk. Was there for his first words. "Mama, thank God, not Dada." She loved him without conditions, without judgment, without asking questions about where his father was or why I was doing this alone. When I picked James up each evening, exhausted from 8 hours of answering complaint calls and reading scripts to angry customers, she'd have him fed and clean and happy, and she'd hand me containers of food she'd accidentally made too much of. Rice and beans. Ooh. Tamales on Fridays. I tried to pay her extra. She refused. "You're doing good, Mija," she'd say, patting my cheek. "You keep going. That's payment enough." The call center wasn't my dream job. It wasn't anyone's dream job. It was 8 hours in a cubicle with fluorescent lights and recycled air, wearing a headset that left dents in my skull, talking to people who treated me like I was personally responsible for every problem in their lives. I got yelled at, hung up on, called names I won't repeat. But I showed up every single day. I met my metrics. I didn't complain. And after 3 months, they promoted me to senior representative. An extra $1 an hour. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was proof that effort mattered. That showing up counted for something in at least one corner of the world. I started saving money. Not a lot. $50 a paycheck at first, then $75, then $100 when I got better at budgeting and learned which grocery stores had the best deals and how to make a rotisserie chicken last for 4 meals. I opened a separate account, one I couldn't access with my debit card, and every 2 weeks I'd deposit my savings and watch the number grow. $100 became $300 became $800. It was the first time in my life I'd had savings. Real savings. Money that wasn't already allocated to rent or bills or diapers. Money that was mine. A buffer between me and catastrophe. With that buffer came something I hadn't felt in over a year. Possibility. Not hope exactly. Hope felt too fragile, too dangerous. But possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't permanent. That maybe I could build something beyond survival. One night, after I'd put James to bed in our apartment, we'd moved out of the motel after 4 months at the call center, into a real apartment with a kitchen and a bedroom and a living room. I sat at the table with a notebook. An actual notebook, not the back of an envelope. I'd bought it at the dollar store. It had a purple cover and lined pages, and holding it felt like holding potential. I wrote at the top of the first page, "Things I want." Felt ridiculous, childish, like making a Christmas list when you're too old to believe in Santa. But I wrote anyway. I want James to have his own bedroom someday. I want to finish college. I want a job that doesn't make me feel dead inside. I want to stop being scared every time the car makes a weird noise. I want to take James somewhere nice on his birthday. Not Chuck E. Cheese. Somewhere with real memories. I want to prove everyone wrong. That last one I underlined 3 times. Because it was the truest thing on the list. More than the practical wants, more than the material things. I wanted to prove wrong every person who'd looked at me with pity or judgment or dismissal. His father. His mother. The caseworker who'd explained the rules like I was stupid. The landlord who'd kicked us out. The employers who'd rejected me. The strangers who'd seen a young single mom and assumed they knew my whole story. I wanted to become someone they'd regret underestimating. But wanting wasn't enough. I knew that. I'd wanted plenty of things over the past year, and wanting hadn't made any of them happen. So I wrote a second list. Things I can do right now. Save $100 every paycheck no matter what. Ask about tuition reimbursement at work. Take 1 online class. Just 1. Stop apologizing for existing. That last one wasn't practical. But it was necessary. I'd spent so long saying sorry. Sorry for taking up space, sorry for needing help, sorry for being a burden, sorry for existing as a poor single mother in a world that treated that like a moral failing, that I'd forgotten I had nothing to apologize for. I didn't choose to be abandoned. I didn't choose poverty. I chose to keep going, keep fighting. And that wasn't something to apologize for. I started with the online class. 1 community college course. Introduction to Business Management. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 7 to 9 p.m. after James was asleep. I'd sit at that table with my laptop, a refurbished one I'd bought for $200 from Facebook Marketplace, and I'd do homework, write papers, take quizzes. It was hard. My brain felt sluggish from years of disuse, from surviving instead of thinking, from exhaustion that never fully went away. But I did it. And when I got my first grade back, an A on a paper about organizational leadership, I cried. Actually cried. Because it was proof that I was still in there somewhere. The girl who'd wanted to be a journalist. Who'd dreamed of writing things that mattered. She wasn't dead. Just buried. And I was digging her out. James turned 1. I threw him a birthday party. Nothing fancy. Carmen brought her grandkids. Ruth from the church came with another single mom she was helping. My mom drove 6 hours to be there. We had a grocery store cake and dollar store decorations and a pile of secondhand toys I'd found at a thrift store. James smashed his face into the cake and laughed, and everyone took pictures. And for 2 hours I felt like a normal mom having a normal birthday party for her normal kid. The absence of his father was a weight in the room. Everyone felt it. No one mentioned it. And I was grateful for that. For the kindness of silence. After everyone left and James was asleep and my mom was doing dishes in the kitchen, I went to my bedroom and pulled out a small wooden box I kept in the back of my closet. Inside was $1,247 in cash. My savings. I'd taken it out of the bank that morning. I sat on my bed and counted it. Once. 3 times. Making sure it was real. That it wasn't a dream or a mistake or something that would disappear if I looked away. This money represented 6 months of sacrifice. 6 months of saying no to things I wanted, of buying the store brand, of walking instead of driving when I could, of packing lunches instead of eating out, of not buying myself anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. 6 months of choosing the future over the present. I did something then that might seem strange. I took out 1 bill, a 20, and I burned it. Not in anger. As a ritual. As a symbol. I lit it with a match over the bathroom sink and watched it turn to ash, and I said out loud, "I'm not that person anymore. I'm not the girl he left in the hospital. I'm not the woman who wanted to give up in the motel. I'm not scared. I'm not sorry. I'm not done. The smoke alarm went off. My mom came running. I explained what I'd done. She looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. But burning that money felt like burning away the past. Like a sacrifice to whatever God or fate or universe decides these things. Saying, I'm ready. I'm ready to be someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who doesn't just survive but actually lives. I started telling people my plans. Not asking permission. Not seeking approval. Just stating facts. I'm going back to school, I told my supervisor. I'm going to need a schedule that works with my classes. She could have said no. Could have made it difficult. But she didn't. She adjusted my hours. Later, she told me I inspired her. That she'd been thinking about finishing her degree too, but had been scared. Now she was doing it. That's when I learned that strength is contagious. That choosing to rise pulls other people up with you. I applied for scholarships, grants, every piece of financial aid I could find. I wrote essays about my circumstances, about James, about wanting to build a better life. Some rejected me, but some didn't. I cobbled together enough funding for 3 classes the next semester, then 4, then a full course load. James turned 2, then 3. Time moved faster when you were building instead of just enduring. He started asking about his father. Where's my daddy? Simple question. Impossible answer. I told him the truth, but gently. Your daddy isn't here. But you have me. And Carmen. And Grandma. And so many people who love you. He seemed satisfied with that. Kids are resilient like that. They accept what's real and move forward. Adults are the ones who get stuck in what should have been. I got another promotion at work. Team leader. Then supervisor. Then manager. Each step came with more money, more responsibility, more proof that I was capable of more than the world had told me I deserved. I bought a car that didn't have a check engine light. I moved us into a 2-bedroom apartment where James had his own room, his own space, his own little world that was safe and stable and his. 4 years after he was born, I graduated with my bachelor's degree, business administration with a minor in communications. I walked across that stage in a rented gown with James in the audience. 6 years old, holding a sign Carmen had helped him make that said, "That's my mommy." And I felt something I hadn't felt since before that door slammed shut in the hospital. Felt proud. Not just of surviving, of thriving, of becoming someone I actually recognized in the mirror. But the promise I'd made, the one about James knowing he was chosen, that was always there. In every decision, every sacrifice, every late night studying while he slept, every time I wanted to quit and didn't. The promise was the foundation everything else was built on. Without it, none of the rest would have mattered. And then, 17 years after he walked out, James's father came back. Not crawling, not begging, but close enough. Years 7 through 17 were a blur of motion. Not chaotic motion. Purposeful motion. The kind that happens when you finally figure out which direction you're going and commit to it with everything you have. Climbed. Not smoothly. Not easily. But consistently. At work, I moved from manager to senior manager to director of customer experience. Each promotion felt like vindication. Like proof that the girl in the motel room crying on the bathroom floor had been wrong about herself. I wasn't worthless. I wasn't a failure. I was someone who could lead teams, make decisions, solve problems, earn respect. The money changed things. Not dramatically. I didn't get rich. But I went from checking my bank account every day with dread to checking it every week with satisfaction. From choosing between gas and groceries to having both without panic. From shopping at thrift stores out of necessity to shopping there by choice because I'd learned you could find quality if you looked hard enough. James never wore clothes with holes in them. Never went to school without lunch money. Never had to tell his friends he couldn't afford something. I made sure of that. I bought a house when he was 12. A real house with a yard and 3 bedrooms and a mortgage that was mine. My name on the deed. My responsibility. My achievement. The day we moved in, I walked through every room by myself before the movers arrived. Living room, kitchen, James's bedroom with the window that looked out onto the street. My bedroom with the closet big enough for all my clothes. The third bedroom I'd turned into an office where I could finish my master's degree, because I hadn't stopped at a bachelor's. Kept going, kept pushing, kept proving. I stood in the middle of that empty house and I cried. But these were good tears. Grateful tears. Disbelief tears. Because 12 years ago I'd been living in a motel wondering if my son would be better off without me. And now I owned a home. An actual home. Not an apartment where neighbors banged on the walls. Not a room where I counted days until I couldn't afford it anymore. A home where we could be loud and messy and ourselves without apology. James grew up strong. Confident. Kind. He played soccer. I never missed a game. He struggled with math. I hired a tutor when helping him myself wasn't enough. He made friends easily, the kind of kid who included everyone, who stood up for kids getting bullied, who came home telling me about his day with genuine enthusiasm. He was everything his father wasn't. Everything his father would never be. But he asked questions as he got older. Natural questions. Important questions. Why doesn't my dad want to know me? What did I do wrong? Is it because of me? Those questions broke my heart every time. Because the answer was never about James. It was never about something he'd done or failed to do or was or wasn't. It was about a man who'd been too weak to face his own choices. Too cowardly to do the hard thing. Too selfish to put anyone's needs above his own comfort. You did nothing wrong, I'd tell him, holding his face in my hands so he had to look at me. Nothing. This is about him, not you. And I know that's not fair. I know it hurts. But you have to believe me when I say his absence is his loss, not yours. You are extraordinary. You are loved. You are enough. He'd nod. He'd believe me in the moment. But I could see the doubt creeping back in. The wondering. The what if. That's what absent fathers do to their children. They create questions that have no good answers. Wounds that never fully heal. Absences that echo louder than presences. So I filled the space. I was mother and father. Nurturer and disciplinarian. Soft place to fall and firm boundary to push against. I taught him to change a tire. To respect women. To apologize when he was wrong. To stand up for what was right even when it was hard. To be loyal. To be honest. To be present. Everything his father hadn't been, I taught him to be. And I did it while working 50-hour weeks. While finishing my master's degree. While serving on the board of a non-profit that helped single mothers. Because once you've been helped, you help others. That's the rule. Ruth had helped me. Carmen had helped me. Strangers who owed me nothing had given me chances. So I gave chances. I mentored young single moms at the non-profit. Helped them with resumes, interview skills, childcare resources. Told them my story not for sympathy but for proof. Proof that rock bottom isn't permanent. That the life you're living today doesn't have to be the life you live tomorrow. One woman I mentored, Maria, 20 years old with twins and no support system, cried when I told her about the motel room, about the bathroom floor, about the dark thoughts. That was you, she said. You lived through that and now you're this? She gestured at me like I was some kind of miracle instead of just a person who'd refused to give up. That was me, I said. And this can be you. Not the same path. Not the same timeline. But possible. It's possible. She finished her GED. Got a job. Moved out of her mother's house. Started college. Sent me a text 2 years later. I'm doing it. Thank you for showing me I could. Those texts were fuel. Proof that survival mattered. That my story mattered. That choosing to keep going when everything said to quit had ripple effects beyond just me and James. James excelled in school. Honor roll. Student council. Varsity soccer. He got accepted to 5 colleges. 5. I sat at the kitchen table reading acceptance letters with him. Both of us grinning like idiots, and I thought, this is it. This is what I was fighting for. Not just survival. Not just stability. But this. His future. His options. his chance to be anything he wanted without the weight of my mistakes or his father's abandonment holding him back. He chose a school 3 hours away. Far enough to feel independent. Close enough to come home when he wanted. When we dropped him off freshman year, helped him move into his dorm room, met his roommate and his roommate's very present parents, I felt something shift. The weight I'd been carrying for 18 years, the constant vigilance, the fear that one misstep would destroy him, the responsibility of being everything, it lifted. Not completely. I'd always be his mother. But the active phase of raising him was over. Done it. We'd done it. In the parking lot, after we'd said goodbye and he'd hugged me one last time before heading back inside, I sat in my car and I let myself feel it. All of it. The pride. The grief. The relief. The terror of what came next. For 18 years, James had been my purpose. My reason for everything. And now he was launching into his own life. And I had to figure out who I was beyond James's mom. Beyond the single mother who beat the odds. I had to figure out who I was just for me. That's when I started writing. Not professionally. Just for myself. In journals. Online. Essays about single motherhood, resilience, survival. I started a blog called Chosen. Notes from a Single Mom. Posted once a week. Didn't think anyone would read it. But people did. Hundreds of people. Then thousands. Women who'd lived through similar hells. Women who were currently living through them. Women who needed to hear that it gets better, it really does, even when you can't see how. I wrote about the motel. The dark thoughts. The shame. The slow climb back. I wrote about James. About the promise I'd made. About learning that strength isn't the absence of weakness but the refusal to let weakness win. I wrote truths I'd never said out loud. And people responded. They shared their stories. They thanked me. They told me I'd saved their lives just by being honest about how hard mine had been. That's when the speaking invitations started coming. Churches. Community centers. Non-profit events. Would you share your story? They'd ask. And I would. Because if my pain could be someone else's permission to keep going, then it hadn't been wasted. I spoke at a women's conference when James was in his junior year of college. 500 women in attendance. I told them everything. The door slamming. The abandonment. Collapse. The rebuilding. I didn't sugarcoat it. Didn't make it inspirational poster pretty. Just told the truth, raw and real, and when I finished, the room was silent for 3 full seconds before they started clapping. Standing. Some crying. And I knew that this honesty, this refusal to pretend survival was easy or linear or anything other than brutally hard. This was my purpose beyond James. This was what I'd been building toward without knowing it. My blog grew. My speaking engagements increased. Publisher reached out. Have you ever thought about writing a book? I had. Course I had. But thinking about it and doing it are different things. So I did it. I wrote a book called The Door He Slammed. A single mother's journey from abandoned to unbreakable. Took me 2 years. 2 years of early mornings and late nights, of reliving trauma for the sake of healing, of choosing vulnerability over self-protection because I knew that someone out there needed to hear it. The book came out when James was 23. 23 years after his father had walked out of that hospital room. 23 years of building a life from rubble. The book did well. Not bestseller well. But well enough. Well enough that more speaking opportunities came. Well enough that I could quit my corporate job and do this full-time. Write, speak, mentor, help. And then 2 months after the book released, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Hello. Silence. Breathing. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 23 years but recognized instantly. Because some wounds leave permanent marks. Some voices you never forget even when you wish you could. It's me, he said. As if that explained anything. As if 23 years could be bridged with 2 words. My hand tightened on the phone. My heart rate spiked. Every emotion I'd processed and healed and moved past came flooding back at once. Rage, grief, betrayal, confusion. And underneath it all, a question I'd carried for over 2 decades. Why? Why are you calling? My voice was steady, cold. The voice of someone who'd survived too much to be shaken by a phone call. I saw your book. I read it. Hey, I need to talk to you. And to James. I need to explain. And there it was. After 23 years he wanted to explain. Wanted forgiveness. Wanted back in. The phone trembled in my hand. But my voice didn't. You need to. Said. You need. Where were you when I needed you? When James needed you? When we were living in a motel and I was considering ending my life because I couldn't see a way forward? Where were you then? He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because there was no answer that made it okay. I was wrong, he finally said. I was scared and stupid and I made a terrible mistake. But I want to make it right. Please. Let me try. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't my decision to make. Not anymore. James was an adult. This was his father. His choice. His chance to get answers to questions that had haunted him his whole life. So I gave him what I'd never gotten. Honesty. I'll talk to James. If he wants to meet you, I'll give him your number. But understand this, you don't get to waltz back in and play dad. You don't get to take credit for who he's become. He's mine. He's always been mine. You lost him the day you walked out. Whatever happens now is his choice, not mine and not yours. I hung up before he could respond. And then the phone rang again. I stared at the phone. It had stopped ringing. Then started again. Same unknown number. Different person. I knew before I answered. Somehow I knew. Mom. James. His voice tight. Confused. He called me. He called me. My father. He called me. Closed my eyes. Of course he had. Of course he'd found James's number somehow. Social media, mutual contacts, whatever desperate measure people use when they want something badly enough. He'd gone around me. Straight to the source. Straight to the son who'd grown up with a father-shaped hole in his life. I know, I said. He called me too. Just now. I was going to tell you. Silence on the line. I could hear James breathing. That same rhythm I'd counted in hospital rooms and motel rooms and late nights when he was sick and I was terrified. His breath had been my anchor for 23 years. Now it sounded unsteady. Lust. What do I do? He finally asked. And God, the pain in those 4 words. The little boy who'd asked me at 5 why his daddy didn't love him. The teenager who'd pretended it didn't matter that he was the only kid at father-son events with his mom. The young man who'd built a life without a blueprint because the man who should have shown him how had vanished before he could open his eyes. That's not my decision, I said. My throat hurt. My chest hurt. Everything hurt. This is yours. Whatever you choose, I support it. If you want to meet him, I'll help you. If you want nothing to do with him, I'll respect that too. But this is your choice, James. Not mine. Not his. Yours. More silence. Then quietly. I think I need to see him. Think. Have questions. I've always had questions. And maybe this is my only chance to get answers. I wanted to scream. Wanted to tell him no. To protect him from the disappointment that was inevitably coming. From the man who'd already failed him once and would absolutely fail him again. But I couldn't do that. Couldn't rob him of this. He'd earned the right to make his own mistakes. To seek his own closure. Even if it destroyed him. Even if I had to watch. Okay, I said. When? He wants to meet Saturday. That coffee shop downtown. The one on 5th Street. 3 days. 3 days to prepare for seeing the face I'd tried so hard to forget. 3 days for James to process 23 years of absence before sitting across from the man responsible for it. Do you want me there? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Yes, please. I can't do this alone. You won't have to. Saturday came too fast and not fast enough. I barely slept Friday night. Kept running through scenarios in my head. What would I say? What would he say? Would I recognize him? Would he recognize me? Not the girl he'd left, but the woman who'd risen from those ashes. Would seeing him undo all the healing I'd done? Would old wounds reopen? Would I feel anything at all? James showed up at my house at 9 a.m. The meeting was at 10. He looked how I felt, pale, nervous, determined. He wore a button-down shirt. His good shoes. Like he was going to a job interview instead of meeting the man who'd abandoned him. "How do I look?" he asked. "Like the best thing I ever did with my life," I said. And meant it. We drove in silence. I kept my hands steady on the wheel even though they wanted to shake. James stared out the window. I could feel the questions churning in him. A hope, a fear. The impossible desire for this to somehow be okay. For there to be an explanation that made sense. A reason that justified 23 years of nothing. The coffee shop was crowded. Saturday morning rush. Families, couples, students with laptops. Normal people living normal lives. Completely unaware that in the corner booth by the window, a reckoning was about to happen. He was already there. Sitting alone. Looking older than I remembered but not as old as he should. Still handsome in that careless way some men maintain even when they don't deserve it. Gray at the temples. Lines around his eyes. A wedding ring on his left hand that made my stomach drop because of course he'd moved on. Of course he'd built a life somewhere else with someone else while we struggled to survive the wreckage he'd left behind. He stood when he saw us. Uncertain. Awkward. His eyes went to James first, and I saw it. The recognition. The shock. Because James looked like him. Same jawline. Same build. Same hands. All the features I'd tried not to see for 23 years were right there. Undeniable proof of biology and betrayal. "James," he said. His voice cracked. "God, you look just like." "Don't." James's voice was cold. Controlled. Nothing like the scared boy who'd asked me what to do 3 days ago. This was the man he'd become. Strong. Direct. Unwilling to be charmed or manipulated. "Don't act like you know me. You don't." His father. I couldn't bring myself to think of him by name anymore. He'd lost that right, flinched. "You're right. Sorry. Can we sit?" We sat. I positioned myself between them. Barrier. Buffer. Old instincts dying hard. A waitress came. We ordered coffee no one would drink. Left. The silence stretched. Heavy. Suffocating. "Why now?" James asked. No preamble. No small talk. Just the question that mattered most. His father looked down at his hands. Those same hands that had touched my face and promised forever. Those same hands that had packed a bag while I was in labor. Those same hands that hadn't held his son even once. "I read your mother's book," he said. "I saw what I did. What I put you both through. And I couldn't live with it anymore. Couldn't pretend it didn't happen. Couldn't keep running from." "You've had 23 years, I interrupted. My voice was ice. 23 years to have this crisis of conscience. 23 years to pick up a phone. Send a letter. Show up. Why now? Why after all this time when we don't need you anymore? When we've already survived the worst of it?" He looked at me then. Really looked. And I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise. Maybe even respect. Because I wasn't the girl he'd left. That girl was dead. I was someone else entirely. Someone he'd never known. Someone he'd never get the chance to know. "You're right," he said. "There's no good answer. No excuse that makes it okay." I was terrified. I was 24 years old and suddenly there was a baby and responsibilities and a future I hadn't planned for. And I panicked. Ran. And then I was too ashamed to come back. Too scared of facing what I'd done. So I just kept running. Built a new life. Pretended the old one hadn't happened. Told myself you were better off without me. "We were," James said. Each word deliberate. "We were better off without you. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt. That doesn't mean I didn't spend my whole life wondering what was wrong with me. Why I wasn't enough to make you stay. Nothing was wrong with you." His father's voice broke. "Nothing. This was never about you. It was about me. My weakness. My failure. You didn't deserve." "No, I didn't." James leaned forward. "I didn't deserve a father who left. I didn't deserve to grow up without you. I didn't deserve to watch my mom work herself to death trying to be enough for both of you. I didn't deserve any of it. But I got it anyway. Because you chose yourself over us. You chose comfort over commitment. You chose to run instead of staying and fighting and being uncomfortable for our sake. Tears were running down his father's face now. I know. You know. And I can't take it back. Can't undo it. But I want to try. I want to be in your life. I want to know you. I want. What do you want? Yes. Because this was the question underneath everything else. What do you actually want from this? Forgiveness. Absolution. A relationship you haven't earned. What? He wiped his face. Looked between us. I want a chance. Just a chance to prove I'm not that person anymore. That I've changed. That I can be. You can't be his father, I said. The words came out harder than I meant them to. Final. Absolute. You lost that right. You don't get it back because you finally feel bad about it. You don't get to show up 2 decades later and claim a title you never earned. I was his father. I taught him how to tie his shoes and ride a bike and be a good man. I was there for every scraped knee and bad dream and heartbreak. I was there. You weren't. And no amount of crying in a coffee shop changes that. The table went quiet. Other conversations buzzed around us. Someone laughed. Baby cried. Life continued while ours fractured again in the exact same place it had broken 23 years ago. Mom's right, James said finally. You can't be my dad. That ship sailed a long time ago. But, he paused. Breathe. But maybe you can be something else. I don't know what yet. I don't even know if I want you in my life. But I came here because I needed to see you. To ask you why. To understand if there's any part of you worth knowing. His father nodded. Desperate. Grateful. Thank you. That's all I'm asking. A chance to show you. I'm not done, James said. If we do this, it's on my terms. My timeline. My boundaries. You don't get to make demands. You don't get to play victim. You don't get to guilt me or pressure me or expect anything. This is about what I need, not what you want. Understood. Understood. And one more thing. James looked at me. Then back at his father. You will respect my mother. Always. Forever. What she did. Raising me alone, building a life from nothing, becoming the person she is today, that's sacred. You don't get to minimize it or rewrite history or pretend you were anything other than absent. She's the hero of my story. Not you. Never you. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. Felt something crack open in my chest. Pride. Love. Gratitude. This man, my son. He just defended me in a way no one ever had. Not because he pitied me, but because he understood. He saw what I'd done. What I'd sacrificed. What I'd become. And he honored it. His father nodded again. I understand. And for what it's worth. He looked at me. Sorry. For everything. You didn't deserve what I did to you. And James is right. You're the hero here. Not me. I didn't respond. Didn't accept his apology. Because some things can't be fixed with words. Some wounds don't heal just because someone finally acknowledges they caused them. James stood. I need time to think. I'll call you if I decide I want to see you again. Don't call me. Don't show up at my school or my apartment or try to contact me through social media. If I want to talk to you, I'll reach out. Until then, leave me alone. He walked out. Followed. Left his father sitting in that booth looking broken and small and 23 years too late. In the parking lot, James leaned against my car and sobbed. Big, heaving sobs that shook his whole body. I held him like I'd held him 1,000 times before. In hospitals and motel rooms and late nights when the world felt too heavy. I held him and let him break because sometimes breaking is part of healing. Did I do the right thing? He asked when he could finally speak. There is no right thing, I said. There's only your thing. Whatever you decide, to see him again, to cut him off completely, to take it slow, that's the right choice because it's yours. I'll support you either way. He pulled back. Looked at me with red eyes and a face I'd watched grow from infant to man. He doesn't deserve you. He never did. No, I agreed. But I never did this for him. I did it for you. Every single day. Every sacrifice. Every struggle. It was all for you. And I'd do it again. 1,000 times over, I'd do it again. We drove home in silence. But this time it was different. Lighter. Like something had been settled. Not resolved. Not healed. But acknowledged. And then the phone rang. Again. The phone. Always the phone. As if the most important moments of my life were destined to come through a small screen and a stranger's voice. This time it was a woman. Professional. Clipped tones. Is this the mother of James Mitchell? My heart stopped. Every parent knows that tone. It's the tone that precedes bad news. Accidents. Hospitals. Worst-case scenarios. Yes. What's wrong? Is he okay? He's fine. I'm not calling about James. I'm calling about his father. My name is Diane Mitchell. I was married to him. We're divorcing. The world tilted. I pulled over to the side of the road. James looked at me concerned, but I held up a hand. I needed to hear this. Why are you calling me? My voice was steady despite the chaos in my chest. Because you need to know what kind of man he really is. Her voice cracked. Not with sadness. With rage. And because my kids, his kids, they deserve to know they have a brother. A brother he's lied about their entire lives. Closed my eyes. Breathe. How old are your children? 19 and 17. Boy and a girl. He told me that he'd never been married before. That he'd never had kids. 23 years of marriage, and it was all built on a lie. I found your book in his car last month. Read it. Recognize things. Confronted him. He admitted everything. The hospital. The abandonment. James. All of it. And you know what he said? He said he was protecting us. That telling us would have ruined our family. I laughed. Couldn't help it. Bitter, broken sound. Protecting you. That's rich. I know. Kicked him out. Filed for divorce. My lawyer is going after him for everything. The house, the savings, the business he built. Because if he could lie about something that big for that long, God knows what else he's hidden. My kids are devastated. They don't know who their father is anymore. Don't know what's real and what's lies. I'm sorry, I said. And I meant it. Not for him. Never for him. But for her. For her kids. For the wreckage he'd left in yet another family's wake. I'm sorry he did this to you. Silence on the line. Then softer. He's sick. That's why he came back. Why he found James. Terminal. 6 months to a year, the doctors said. Pancreatic cancer. Same thing that killed his father, he told me. He wanted to make peace before he died. Wanted forgiveness. Wanted to pretend he could fix 23 years of damage in whatever time he has left. Pancreatic cancer. The same disease that had taken my father. The same disease that had started this whole cascade of events. My dad getting sick, me dropping out of school, getting the job at the diner, meeting him. The symmetry was almost poetic. Almost funny if it wasn't so devastatingly sad. He's asking for James to visit him, Diane continued. Says he needs to tell him things. Important things before it's too late. I told him I'd pass along the message, but that I couldn't make promises. That he'd burned too many bridges and maybe some fires can't be put out. Thank you for telling me, I said. And for reaching out about your kids. If James wants to meet them, I'll support that. They're not responsible for their father's choices any more than he was. Neither are you, she said. And God, the understanding in her voice. The solidarity. 2 women, decades apart. Destroyed by the same man's inability to face himself. I read what you went through. What you built. You're incredible. I hope you know that. I hope he knows what he lost. We hung up. I sat in my parked car on the side of the road. James staring at me with wide, confused eyes, and I told him everything. About Diane. About his half-siblings. About the cancer. About the request for a visit. I watched his face process each revelation, shock, anger, sadness, something else I couldn't quite name. He has other kids, James said slowly. He had a whole other family while I grew up without him. He could be a father to them but not to me. Yes. And now he's dying and he wants my forgiveness. My time. My emotional energy. After 23 years of nothing. He wants me to give him peace. Yes. James was quiet for a long time. Waited. Didn't push. Didn't offer advice. This was his to navigate. Finally. I don't owe him anything. No. You don't. But part of me wants to see him anyway. Not for him. For me. 'Cause maybe there are things I need to hear. Or things I need to say. I don't know. Then we'll figure it out together. We drove home. That evening, James called his father. I didn't listen to the conversation. That was between them. But when James came out of his room an hour later, his eyes were red but his expression was calm. Resolved. I'm going to see him. Once. At the hospice where he's staying. I told him I'm not promising forgiveness. I'm not promising a relationship or regular visits or deathbed reconciliation. I'm going because I have questions and he's the only person with answers. And after that, whatever happens, happens. 3 days later, we drove to the hospice facility across town. A clean, quiet building that smelled like antiseptic and flowers. Where people went to die with dignity. With morphine drips and soft music and family members who showed up. Unlike how I'd almost died. Alone in a motel room with dark thoughts and no one to pull me back except a baby I'd considered leaving. His father looked smaller. Grayer. The cancer had hollowed him out. Made him look like what he was. A man at the end with nothing to show for it except regrets and broken families. His new wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, wasn't there. His other kids weren't there. He was alone. And that, more than anything, felt like justice. Not the dramatic, explosive kind. Not revenge or punishment or cosmic retribution. Just the quiet, inevitable consequences of a life lived selfishly. Just loneliness at the end. Just facing mortality with the knowledge that everyone you were supposed to love either hated you or couldn't be bothered to show up. James sat beside his bed. I stayed in the doorway. Close enough to hear. Far enough to give them space. Thank you for coming, his father said. His voice was weak. Medicated. Don't thank me. I didn't come for you. I came for me. I know. And I understand. I need you to know I'm sorry. For all of it. For leaving. For missing your life. For being too weak to stay. For having other kids and not telling them about you. For coming back only when I was dying. For everything. Okay, James said. Nothing more. No absolution. No forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know the life you and your mother built. That's more than I ever did. You turned out better than I deserve. Better than anything I could have taught you. And that's because of her, not me. I felt tears prick my eyes. Hated that his words affected me. Hated that after everything, some tiny wounded part of me still needed to hear him acknowledge what I'd done. What I'd survived. What I'd become despite him. You're right, James said. It is because of her. She's the reason I'm standing here instead of being another statistic. Another kid destroyed by an absent father. Another broken person repeating cycles of trauma. She's the reason I know how to be a man. How to show up. How to love people even when it's hard. Everything good in me comes from her. You gave me DNA. She gave me everything else. His father nodded. Tears running down his gaunt face. I know. And I'm glad. I'm glad you had her. I'm glad she was strong enough for both of us. I'm glad, he coughed. Struggled for breath. I'm glad you're going to be okay without me. That you already are. They talked for another hour. I don't know what all was said. Some of it James told me later. Some of it he kept to himself. But when we left, when we walked out of that hospice into the sunlight and fresh air and the world that would keep turning long after his father stopped existing in it, James looked lighter. Not happy, but unburdened. Like he'd put down something he'd been carrying his whole life without realizing it. "How do you feel?" Yes. "Like I got what I needed. Not what I wanted, but what I needed." Answers. Acknowledgement. The truth. And the certainty that I don't have to go back. That I showed up once and that's enough. That I can move forward without wondering, what if? Good. That's good. We got ice cream. Sat in the park like we used to when he was little. Watched kids on the playground. People walking dogs. Life continuing in all its messy, beautiful normalcy. "Mom." "Yeah." "He told me to tell you something," he said. He said the biggest mistake of his life wasn't leaving. It was leaving you. That you were the best thing that ever happened to him, and he was too stupid and scared to see it until it was too late. I didn't respond. Didn't know how. Because what do you do with an apology that comes 23 years too late? What do you do with words that would have changed everything if they'd been said when they mattered? You hold them. You turn them over. You decide whether to let them mean something or let them drift away like smoke. I chose to let them drift. His father died 6 weeks later. James got the call from Diane. He didn't cry. Didn't fall apart. Just nodded and said, "Okay." He went to the funeral. Met his half-siblings. Awkward but kind encounters. They exchanged numbers. Promised to stay in touch. Actually did. Because they weren't their father. They were just kids trying to make sense of the wreckage he'd left behind. At the funeral, people spoke about his father like he'd been a good man. A devoted husband and father to his second family. Successful businessman. A pillar of the community. They talked about his charity work, his sense of humor, his dedication to his kids. And I sat in the back row listening to this eulogy for a man I'd known as a coward, and I realized something profound. People are multiple things. They're heroes and villains. Strong and weak. Capable of profound love and devastating cruelty. His father had been a good dad to his other kids. A good husband for 20+ years. And he'd also abandoned his firstborn in a hospital and let me drown while he built a life somewhere else. Both things were true. Neither erased the other. I didn't speak at his funeral. Didn't stand up and tell my truth. That wasn't the place for it. My truth was already told. In my book, in my life, in the man James had become. That was my testimony. That was my victory. Driving home after the funeral, James said, "Life's not fair, is it?" No, it's not. He got to have it both ways. Got to abandon us and still have a family. Still be remembered as a good guy. Still die with people mourning him. Yes, but he also died knowing he failed you. Died with that guilt. Died alone because his second family couldn't forgive the lies. That's something. Is it enough? I don't know. Probably not. But it's what we get. And the real victory isn't that he suffered. It's that we didn't let his choices destroy us. We survived. We thrived. We became people worth knowing. That's the justice, James. Not his death. Our life. 6 months after his father's funeral, James came to me with something in his hands. Letter. Yellowed. Priest. Well, I found this in a box of his things. Diane sent it to me. She said she found it hidden in his office. Took it. My name on the envelope. In handwriting I remembered. Dated 3 weeks after he'd left. 3 weeks after the hospital. 23 years ago. Have you read it? Yes. No. It's addressed to you. But I wanted to give you the choice. You don't have to read it. You don't have to let him back in, even through words. You can burn it. Throw it away. Whatever you need to do. I looked at that envelope for a long time. Felt the weight of it. Not the physical weight, it was nearly nothing. But the emotional weight. The potential for it to reopen wounds I'd spent decades healing. The risk that whatever was inside would undo me all over again. But I was curious. After all this time, after everything that had happened, I wanted to know what he'd written when it was still fresh. When he just made the choice that would define all of our lives. I opened it that night. Alone. With tea and tissues and the awareness that I could stop reading at any moment if it became too much. The letter was short. 3 paragraphs. Messy handwriting. Tear stains that had dried years ago. I left because I was scared. Not of you. Not of James. Of myself. Of who I'd have to become. Of the responsibility. Of failing you both. Which I knew I would because I've failed everyone I've ever loved. I thought leaving would hurt less than staying, and watching you realize I wasn't enough. Wasn't man enough. Strong enough. Good enough. I know that's cowardice. I know it doesn't make it okay. Nothing makes it okay. But I need you to know it wasn't about you. You were perfect. You are perfect. You deserved someone who could rise to meet you, and I couldn't. So I ran. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. I'm sorry is inadequate for what I've done. But I am sorry. I'll be sorry every day for the rest of my life. I hope someday you can forgive me. Not for my sake. For yours. 'Cause you deserve peace. And I've taken too much from you already. I read it 3 times. Cried. Then put it back in the envelope and sat with it. With the words. With the explanation I'd wanted for so long. And I realized something that had taken me 23 years to understand. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's not about excusing what they did or pretending it didn't hurt or welcoming them back into your life. Forgiveness is about releasing the grip they have on your peace. About deciding that their choices don't get to define your story anymore. About choosing freedom over bitterness. I didn't forgive him in that moment. Not fully. Forgiveness like that takes time. Takes processing. Takes sitting with pain until it transforms into something else. But I started by acknowledging that he was human. Flawed. Broken in his own ways. And that his brokenness had nothing to do with my worth. For years I'd carried a story. That I wasn't enough. That if I'd been prettier, smarter, less needy, less pregnant, less complicated, he would have stayed. That his leaving was proof of my fundamental inadequacy. That story had poisoned everything. My relationships, my self-image, my ability to accept love without suspicion. It had made me hard when I wanted to be soft. Closed when I wanted to be open. Self-sufficient to the point of isolation because depending on anyone felt like setting myself up for inevitable abandonment. But the story was a lie. His leaving was about him. His fear. His weakness. His inability to face hard things. I could have been anyone and the result would have been the same because the problem wasn't me. It was never me. Realizing that, really absorbing it, felt like breathing for the first time in decades. Like a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was there suddenly lifting. I wasn't damaged goods. I wasn't unlovable. I wasn't too much or not enough. I was just a person who'd been hurt by another person's choices. And I could choose to stop letting those choices hurt me. I started therapy. Real therapy. Not the kind I'd tried in my 20s when I couldn't afford it and went twice before quitting. Deep, consistent, twice-a-week therapy where I unpacked everything. Trauma. The survival mode I'd lived in for so long I'd forgotten there were other ways to exist. The walls I'd built so high I couldn't let anyone in. The belief that if I ever stopped fighting, stopped being vigilant, stopped controlling everything, it would all fall apart. My therapist, Linda, patient and kind and older than me by enough years to feel maternal, asked me one day, "What would happen if you let yourself be soft? If you let someone take care of you for once?" I didn't have an answer. Couldn't imagine it. Softness felt like vulnerability and vulnerability felt like death. "What if soft doesn't mean weak?" she asked. "What if it just means human?" I thought about that for weeks. About the difference between strength and hardness. About how I'd confused survival with living. About how I'd been so busy proving I didn't need anyone that I'd forgotten how to want anyone. How to let them in. How to believe they might stay. I started dating. Not seriously at first. Just testing the waters. Seeing if I could be vulnerable with another person without self-destructing. It was terrifying. Every time someone showed interest, every time they wanted more than casual, I'd feel the urge to run. To protect myself. To end it before they could leave me. But I didn't run. I stayed. I practiced saying what I needed instead of pretending I didn't need anything. I practiced accepting help instead of doing everything alone. I practiced trusting that not everyone leaves. That some people stay. that I was worthy of people who stay. I met someone. Good man. Steady. Kind. Patient with my walls and my trauma and my tendency to sabotage when things got too good. His name was David. He was a teacher. Divorced. 2 grown kids. He'd been through his own fire and came out softer, not harder. That's how I knew he was different. He wasn't afraid of feelings. Wasn't afraid of commitment. Wasn't afraid of me. We took it slow. You're slow. He never pushed. Never demanded more than I could give. Just showed up. Consistently. Predictably. Boringly, wonderfully reliably. And slowly, so slowly I barely noticed it happening, I let him in. Let him see the parts of me I'd kept hidden. The scared parts. The broken parts. The parts that still woke up sometimes in the middle of the night convinced everyone would leave. I'm not going anywhere, he'd say. Every time the fear came. Every time I tried to push him away. I'm staying. Choose you. Choose us. You're not getting rid of me that easily. And eventually I believed him. James loved David. Not as a father. He'd never need another father, didn't want one. But as a friend. As a presence in our lives that was healthy and good and proof that not all men run when things get complicated. On my 48th birthday, David asked me to marry him. We were sitting on my back porch watching the sunset. Nothing fancy. No grand gesture. Just him looking at me and saying, I want to spend the rest of my life proving you can trust me. Will you let me? Said yes. Not because I needed him. Not because I couldn't survive alone. I'd already proven I could. But because I wanted him. Because life is better with someone to share it with. Because love isn't about necessity. It's about choice. And I chose him. We got married in my backyard. Small ceremony. James walked me down the aisle. Carmen was there. Ruth. My mum. A handful of friends I'd made over the years. David's kids. Even Diane and James's half-siblings. A patchwork family built from broken pieces that had somehow formed something beautiful. During our vows, I looked at James, 25 years old, confident and whole, and exactly who he was supposed to be. And I thought about that promise I'd made in the hospital. That he would know he was chosen. That he would know he was worth fighting for. That he would know his mother didn't leave. Kept that promise. And in keeping it, I'd saved us both. Later at the reception, James gave a speech. Short. Simple. My mom taught me that family isn't about who gave you life. It's about who shows up for your life. David, thank you for showing up. Thank you for loving her the way she deserves to be loved. And Mom. His voice cracked. Thank you for never giving up. For teaching me what real strength looks like. For being enough when the world said you weren't. For choosing me every single day. I am who I am because of you. And I'm proud to be your son. The room was silent except for crying. Happy crying. Grateful crying. The kind of crying that happens when something broken finally heals. That night, lying next to David in the home I'd built, with James safe and happy and launched into his own beautiful life, I thought about forgiveness again. About the letter. About his father. About the girl in the hospital bed who'd been so scared and alone. I forgave him. Not out loud. Not in some dramatic declaration. But quietly. Internally. I released him from the role of villain in my story. I released myself from the role of victim. I let go of the anger I'd carried like armor for so long. And in letting go, I made space for something better. For peace. For joy. For the life I'd built that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with me. The lesson, the one I tell audiences now when I speak, the one I write about, the one I want every person struggling to hear, is this: what happens to you is not your identity. Trauma is not your destiny. Abandonment is not proof of your worth. You are not the worst thing someone did to you. You are what you choose to do next. And next. And next. Every day you choose to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep believing you deserve better. That's the story. That's the victory. That's the lesson. Life will break you. It breaks everyone. But you get to decide if it breaks you open or breaks you down. If it makes you bitter or makes you better. If it destroys you or transforms you. That choice is yours. Always yours. And no one can take it away. I'm writing this from my office. The third bedroom in the house I bought. The room that represents everything I fought for. Outside my window, I can see David working in the garden. He's planting sunflowers. My favorite. Not because he has to. 'Cause he wants to. 'Cause he knows they make me smile. Because that's what love looks like when it's real. Small gestures repeated over time. Presence. Consistency. James called this morning. He's engaged. Her name is Sarah. She's brilliant and kind and doesn't take his bullshit, which is exactly what he needs. They're planning a wedding for next spring. He asked if I'd help. Asked if David would walk him down the aisle because, in his words, he's been more of a father to me in 5 years than biology ever was in 0. Said yes. Cried happy tears. The kind that come from witnessing your child become someone you're proud to know. Someone who breaks cycles instead of repeating them. Someone who chooses differently because he saw what choosing wrong looks like. Someone who stays because he watched his mother stay when leaving would have been easier. 26 years ago, a door slammed in a hospital room. That sound was supposed to be the end of my story. The final note in a tragedy about a girl who made bad choices and paid the price. Cautionary tale. Statistic. Another single mother who couldn't make it. Another child without a father destined to repeat the pattern. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The door slamming was the sound of everything I thought I knew shattering. My plans. My identity. My belief that love conquers all and promises mean something and people who look you in the eyes and swear forever actually mean it. That door took all of that away. And in the silence that followed, in that hospital room with my newborn son and my broken body and my shattered heart, I had to decide who I was going to become. I could have become bitter, hard, closed. I could have let that abandonment define every relationship, every choice, every moment that came after. I could have taught James that men leave and love hurts and trusting anyone is foolish. I could have survived without healing, existed without living, made it through without actually being present for any of it. But I didn't. Not because I was special or strong or better than anyone else facing impossible circumstances, but because every single day I woke up and made a choice. Try. Keep going. To believe that today might be fractionally better than yesterday. To show up for my son even when showing up for myself felt impossible. To ask for help when pride told me to suffer alone. To keep my promise, the one I made in that hospital bed, that James would know he was chosen, that he was worth fighting for, that his mother didn't leave. That promise saved us both. The journey from that hospital room to this office wasn't linear. It wasn't inspirational poster pretty. It was messy and ugly and full of moments where I wanted to quit. Where I did quit temporarily before forcing myself to start again. It was motel rooms and bathroom floors and dark thoughts I'm not proud of. It was selling everything I owned and eating ramen for weeks and crying in parking lots and wondering if I was ruining my son by being his only parent. But it was also something else. It was micro victories that added up to massive change. First stable paycheck. First night of uninterrupted sleep. First time James laughed and I laughed with him instead of through tears. First apartment that wasn't falling apart. First promotion. First college class. First time I looked in the mirror and recognized the woman looking back. First time I let someone love me without sabotaging it. First time I realized I'd gone an entire day without thinking about his father. Without carrying that wound like an identity. Each of those moments mattered. Each of those choices mattered. The big dramatic ones. Leaving the motel, going back to school, writing the book. And the small invisible ones. Getting out of bed when every cell in my body wanted to stay under the covers. Choosing vegetables instead of cigarettes when the stress got bad. Smiling at James even when I felt like dying inside. Not screaming when I wanted to scream. Not running when I wanted to run. Ping, ping, ping. That's the lesson I want you to hear. The real one. Not the pretty version where everything works out because you deserve it or because you tried hard enough or because some cosmic force rewards the righteous. Life doesn't work that way. Good people suffer. Bad people prosper. Justice is rare and often inadequate. The man who abandoned us got to live a whole other life while we struggled. He died with people mourning him. There was no lightning bolt from heaven. No moment of perfect revenge. No dramatic comeuppance that made everything balanced. But here's what did happen: we survived. We thrived. We became people worth knowing. We built a life so full and rich and beautiful that his absence stopped mattering. We proved that the worst thing someone does to you doesn't have to define you. That trauma is not destiny. That you are not your circumstances. You are what you choose to do with them. I think about that girl in the hospital sometimes. 22 years old. Bleeding and alone. Listening to footsteps fade and wondering how she'd survive the next hour, let alone the next 18 years. I wish I could go back to her. Sit on the edge of that bed. Hold her hand. Tell her everything that's coming. The motel room, the job rejections, the desperation, the small victories, the slow climb, the love she'll eventually accept, the son who'll grow into an extraordinary man, the life she'll build that she can't even imagine yet. I wish I could tell her, you're going to make it. Not easily, not quickly, not without scars, but you're going to make it. And 26 years from now, you'll sit in an office in a house you own, married to a man who chose you every day, watching your son plan his wedding, writing your story for people who need to hear it, and you'll realize something profound. You'll realize that the door slamming wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to you. It was the moment you became unbreakable. So this is for you. For the person reading this who's in their own hospital room, their own motel bathroom, their own moment of complete despair, wondering if they can survive what comes next. I'm here to tell you you can. Not because you're special or because I believe in you. I don't know you. But because humans are capable of extraordinary resilience when they have no choice. Because rock bottom is a foundation you can build on. Because every single person who's ever survived the unsurvivable did it the same way. One moment, one choice, one breath at a time. You don't need a plan. You don't need hope. You don't need to believe in yourself or see the path forward. You just need to make the next right choice. Get out of bed. Feed yourself. Feed your kids if you have them. Make one phone call. Fill out one application. Ask for one piece of help. Do the next thing. Then the next. Then the next. Eventually, not quickly, but eventually those next things add up to a life. And someday, years from now, you'll look back and you won't recognize the person you were at your lowest. You'll see someone else. Someone who survived. Someone who fought. Someone who stayed when leaving felt easier. And you'll realize that person, that desperate, broken, terrified person, was the bravest version of you that ever existed. James just texted me a photo. Him and Sarah. Both smiling. Truly, genuinely happy. The kind of happy that comes from building something real with someone who stays. I sent back a heart emoji and a message. Your dad would be proud. And I meant me. I'm his dad. I've always been his dad. And I'm proud. So impossibly proud. The door slammed 26 years ago. But I opened every door that came after. So here's my question for you. Not rhetorical. Real. Have you lived through something that should have destroyed you but didn't? Have you survived your own slam door? Have you made it through nights you didn't think you'd survive? If you have, tell someone. Share your story. Let someone else who's drowning know that dry land exists. That they're not alone. That survival is possible even when it feels impossible. And if you're in the middle of it right now, if you're reading this from your own version of hell, please hear me. You are not alone. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not too far gone. You are in the middle of a story that isn't finished yet. And the ending hasn't been written. You get to write it. One choice at a time. One day at a time. One breath at a time. Please stay. The world needs who you're becoming on the other side of this. And if you've made it this far, if you've read all 60-something minutes of my story, thank you. Thank you for witnessing. For listening. For caring about a girl you never met who became a woman through fire. Your attention is a gift. Your time is precious. And you spent it here with me in this story of pain and survival and transformation. That matters. You matter. Your story matters. Now go live it. Go write the next chapter. Go prove that slammed doors are just opportunities for new beginnings. Go be unbreakable,